Hello, welcome to my little trip down road testing memory lane. Q&A video for you today. But before I go on, I just want to say thanks to everybody that has come to say hello and during the summer when I've been out and about. It's much appreciated. It's nice to meet you all. It's nice to know that you're enjoying these videos, especially at Spa. I mean, it's mad when people come and say hello from overseas. So I was at doing a Spa track day on my GSX-R 750, and also did the bikers festival and the parade lap with my girlfriend Nina on her Fantic, which was really cool. There's a video coming up all about that. We were just gonna rock up on the track day and just sort of stand in the paddock really next to the bikes. We didn't have a garage or awning or van or anything like that because I rode there. So I've got to say thank you to some people who took pity on us, because we would have roasted to a crisp in the sunshine. It was really hot there. It was some classic racing, boys and girls. So a big thanks to Core, to Ian, Marcel and the family for letting us use their awning and giving us food and drink all day. It was amazing, and that's why the biking community is so great, you know, and the racing community and the classic community as well. So big thanks to them, and you can see the video coming up next month sometime. And also, when I was in France recently for an MCN test, riding some Suzukis, and we're up a mountain near Paul Ricard. Fantastic stretch of road, which again I'll talk about in a future video. But a young man called Philippe just came up and said hello as well, which was really cool. So hi to Philippe and his amazing Aprilia RS250. So yeah, I've been on my travels, been to Spa, I've been to south of France doing an MCN test and some Suzukis, and I've ridden some superb bikes, which you can see in future videos. And it was really nice to ride them, really nice to meet the people and to hear their stories. So yeah, it's been a busy old summer, and it continues to be so. So I hope you're having a great summer as well, wherever you are and whatever you're riding. So let's crack on with some questions, shall we? So the first one is from Into Stella 526. Oh, I lost it already. Bear with me, caller. Right. Do you think the lack of young riders and interest in sports bikes is due to the fact that all motorbike sports are subscription based and not free to air, therefore reducing the exposure to a wider audience? As a kid, I used to love the weekends racing on TV, and that's when I got hooked on it all. That's a really interesting question, a really interesting debate. Yeah, so MotoGP, WSB, BSB in the UK anyway, is you've got to pay about 30 quid a month with TNT Sports. You can also subscribe to MotoGP.com. But what I'd say as a racing fan, when you subscribe to these channels, they offer amazing value. Now, whether you think the price is steep or not, or affordable or not, is another question, but the value they provide is superb. You know, the punditry, the level, the high level of commentators, ex-racers, etc., the camera work, the behind the scenes stuff, it is just amazing. And watching the racing on TV like that is in a lot of ways better than going to the track, although going to the track and getting the atmosphere and everything, you can't beat that either. You can probably sort of do a bit of both. And I suppose all the time I've been watching since I was 17, 18, back in the late 80s, there was only sort of limited access to GPs anyway. World Superbike hadn't really kind of got going then. Domestic racing was on telly. So there's always been some kind of paywall. And I think that it's kind of, that's why you've got such great quality coverage now, because, you know, you are paying for it. And I don't know if you could sort of get that level of coverage if it was free to air, because great coverage, great journalism costs money. You know, it's the same thing with, you know, the media. The stuff you have to pay for and get proper journalism is always going to be better than kind of outlets that do it for free and kind of rely on low-hanging fruit or press releases or whatever. You're just never going to get such a good product than if you've actually got a paid journalist to go somewhere. For example, you know, all the tests MCN does, you know, we've got to go and get the bikes from somewhere, we've got to go to a location, you've got to pay the riders, etc., etc. That's why you get such a kind of a fulsome, thorough, worthy test. And it's the same with the TV stuff, I'm sure. But having said that, for the casual viewer, for the kind of the youngsters that could easily have their head turned by motorbikes, having everything behind a paywall isn't going to kind of help anyone. So it's quite a difficult quandary to know how to solve. I mean, just from my own experience, yeah, a friend of mine, a couple of friends of mine might have had Eurosport back in the day, and that was my only chance to watch 500s when I really kind of got into it. But I remember probably the reason I'm sitting here now, probably the reason I'm an MCN road tester, the reason I love motorbikes is one Sunday afternoon watching Grandstand on TV and watching Kevin Schwantz on his Pepsi Suzuki decimate the field in the wet at Nürburgring and winning on his RGV 500 Suzuki. And kind of from that moment, I wanted to race. I wanted to be into motorbikes, and that absolutely inspired me. And I think if all racing had been behind a paywall, I would never have seen that, and I may not have been where I am now. And you know, with my passion for motorcycles, and I'm sure it might be the same for a lot of you watching now. So yeah, it's a real difficult one in terms of, you know, quality of coverage. Then I think having stuff behind a paywall is good value. You know, that's changing a little bit now. Some sports are coming back from a paywall, experimenting with that. Obviously, you know, it's in everyone's best interest to get as many eyes as they can on a given sport. And with Liberty Media now taking over MotoGP, things might change. I mean, I'm not privy to any of that kind of behind the scenes information, and there's a lot of people a lot cleverer than me that kind of know the ins and outs of it. But it'd be interesting to see how that goes. But yeah, I think you're right. I think definitely maybe a lot of kids aren't being turned by motorcycles because they're just not being exposed to it. And it's a shame with the UK. The UK's mainstream media are very negative towards motorcycles still. You know, you don't see any motorbike coverage on the news or anything like that unless it's bad news. There's no celebratory stuff. Maybe if there's a British Grand Prix or something and a British rider does well, but it's all the same old kind of tropes being just rolled out, isn't it? You know, there'll be a motorbike bit on telly and then it'll be Born to Be Wild music and Hell's Angels and mods and Barry Sheehan and everything like that. So it's pretty sad, really. That's kind of quite UK specific, because in a lot of European countries, motorcycles are a lot more acceptable as everyday transport, because, you know, doctors, nurses, teachers, businessmen or whatever go to work on a scooter, and it's just not like that here. I mean, I'm sure many of you watching who live in the UK, if you mention anything about bikes to somebody who doesn't know much about bikes, they'll roll off a load of accidents they know about, or, you know, people that have injured themselves or whatever on a bike. So there's a kind of a lot of negativity towards motorcycles that I think it's almost impossible to overcome in this country unless the mainstream media kind of change their angle. And it may be that, you know, a bit of free to air TV helps as well. I mean, I know there are occasionally MotoGP races that are free, but I don't honestly think that, you know, the person in the street, the kid in the street would know about them or necessarily want to sit down and watch it. You know, I think it's a kind of a bigger question, really. But it'd be very interesting to know what you think. Do you think that watching bikes on telly should be free? Are you happy to pay for a subscription to watch the best motorbike TV there's probably ever been? So yeah, put your comments below, and be interesting to see what you think. But that's a great question to start the video off with. Thank you very much. Next is from Sethos636. Nevesy, on track sometimes I have a bad habit of pulling myself up on the bars after corners and putting my weight on the bars through corners. Do you have any sage advice? It would be appreciated. Well, thanks for your question. Yeah, so what you're describing, first of all, is you're going through a corner and you come back out of the corner and you're pulling yourself back on the bike. And to pull yourself back on the bike, you need to kind of wrench on the bars, and you're probably making the bike a little bit unstable. So, you know, this is one thing. It's all very well talking about body position on the bike and hanging off and all the rest of it. You've kind of got to know how you get out of that scenario. What happens when you come out of a corner? So a lot of people I see on tracks when I'm instructing or whatever, they're hanging off in the corner really nicely. They come out and they're in a big rush to get back on the bike again. So by doing that, when you try and get back on the bike too soon, coming out of a corner, when the corner's done, you know, when you haven't got too much lean angle anymore, the physical act of pulling yourself back onto the bike is actually pushing the bike back over again. It's actually kind of leaning the bike back over when you want to be lifting it up progressively as the corner finishes. And by doing that, you're reducing grip, because if you think about it, and I've said this many times before, and when I'm instructing, if you've got full lean, you can't use any throttle. And if you're fully upright, you can use full throttle. It's completely safe. And there's always that relationship. If you're coming out of a corner and then you're pulling yourself back on the bike, there'll be a period where not only is it hard to get on the bike, but you'll be kind of reducing grip as you're doing it. So the kind of rule of thumb around most tracks is, well, around all tracks and all corners, is that you want to stay hanging off really until the corner's finished. And so, for example, if you're going through a right-hander and there's another right-hander coming up, you just stay hanging off. You don't get back onto the middle of the bike. You can get maybe you can get your head back in the middle of the bike, but you don't need to get your bum and your feet and everything back into position again, because not only will you unsettle things coming out of the corner, you've got more to do when you approach the next corner. So for a lot of tracks, unless it's got a really long straight, you're either hanging off one way or the other, anticipating the next corner coming up. You're very rarely sat bang in the middle of the bike, you know, especially if it's a big bike with a lot of power that just munches through straights really fast. If you've got like a very small bike, you need to get tucked in and under the fairing and all the rest of it. But maybe somewhere like Donington, where I instruct a lot, you're not even really sat in the middle of the bike along the back straight. You're always hanging off, anticipating the corner one way or the other. So, you know, that's what's happening after the corners, and then putting your weight on the bars through the corners. Again, you want to have a softer grip on the bars as you can. So once you have turned into the corner, really you're hanging on with the bottom half of your body. So again, body position is quite important. So your mid corner body position, your arm should be bent and really soft. Your outside arm can be quite straight, and you're hanging on with your outside thigh on the fuel tank, your outside heel digging into the heel plates, and you've got kind of your one bum cheek on the seat. But all your kind of grip on the bike really is with the lower half of your body and not with the top half. The top half should be quite kind of floppy. So, you know, it's all a question of everything you're describing there is body position. It's a question of knowing the correct body position, the top and the bottom half, and then when to get in the body position and when to come out of it, which is a big subject really. You know, it kind of needs a day on track with an instructor, or doing a lot of research where someone like Moto Voodoo, their videos and stuff, yeah, to learn a little bit more about it. But great question, but I hope that helps. Next, from Witch Doctor 6502, I really wanted to avoid asking you about tyres again, but if Nevesy or anyone out there has their 2 cents, I welcome the suggestions. I have a KTM 890 SMT, drive most of the year in Central Europe, so temperatures from 10 to 30 degrees. Style varies from city commute to short trips and larger 2 to 3,000 k road trips once a year. Recently I was on track and got hooked, so I want to add a few hours on track 2 to 3 times a year. Mostly I ride within the limits, but not going to lie, there are times where I go for more spirited rides. What tyres are a good fit? Currently I have S23s and like them quite a lot, but they're quite pricey and I'm not sure if it's the right fit for my style of riding. Good question. I mean, yeah, I would say a general all-round sports tyre like an S23 Bridgestone is probably perfect for the kind of riding you describe. You know, they work in a big temperature window, they're good for touring, they're good for track days, especially on a 890 SMT. They'd be more than good enough. But I would say that given that you've got an SMT and it's not a pure sports bike, so you know you're always going to have kind of a few kind of compromises there when it comes to cornering on a tall bike like that, and maybe throw in sticky tires at it wouldn't be that kind of relevant anyway. I would go for a new generation of sports touring tire. So this year I've been running Bridgestone T33s, their new sports touring tyre, on my Street Fighter, and on the road they're every single bit as good as a sports tyre. If someone asked you what those tyres were and you didn't know, you'd quite happily say they're a sports tyre. They do everything a sports tyre should do. They steer nicely and they've got loads and loads of grip, but they warm up fast because they're sports touring compound. They're good in the wet. They wear really, really well. And although I've never ridden them on track, I would predict that they're pretty good on track as well, because we used to use Bridgestone sports touring tyres at the Ron Aslan Race School back when I was instructing there on fire blades, and you could get around pretty quick. Obviously the profiles aren't as sporty as a sportier tyre. The tyres themselves are a little bit heavier because they've got more tread on them, more rubber on them to make them last longer. So they're not going to be the tyres that are going to give you the lap record, but you can certainly have a lot of fun on them and really do what you want with them on the road. The same would be true with anything in Pirelli's range or Metzeler's range or Michelin's range or anything in between, or Dunlop's, Conti's, because modern generation sports touring tyres really give you your cake and eat it. They're very, very good. So that's what I'd recommend really. I'd go for a sports touring tyre on your bike. You can do everything you want you describe on the road in any temperature. They'll last for ages, so they're good value, and you can get away with doing some track days as well. You know, you're not going to be the fastest on the track with those tyres, but if you want to have more of a fun experience and race your stopwatch, then that may be the tyre for you. So good quality, new generation sports touring tyre. There you go. Next. AD Drury 1234, thanks for your message. Another good video, mate. If you were spending your own money and was only going to have one bike, what would you get? I've done a few track days. I'm not interested in doing any of those. I'm 51 and sports bike on the roads are too uncomfortable. The last one I had was an RSV4 factory, which was a dream bike I always wanted. Had a test ride and loved it, but by the time I got home from the dealer, I was already starting to regret it. Had it for over a year and hardly used it. I went to sit on a new Hyper Motard and fancy one of those, but the seat is rock hard. I had a KTM 950 SM years ago and it was the most fun bike I ever owned. I'm looking for something which is good fun without having to do 100 mile an hour plus everywhere to enjoy. Cheers. Well, that's a pretty easy one really. You know, a sports naked or a super naked, and depending on what you fancy. So you know, the best sports nakeds out there would be an MT-09, Street Fighter V2 or a Street Triple, you know, either the base models or the flashy models. They're going to give you everything you want. You know, as a solo rider, you don't really need anything more. They're fast as flip, handle amazing, look great, they're characterful, comfortable, and they give you a good impression of speed. So more of impression of speed than a super bike, and more usable and comfortable than a supermoto style bike. If you wanted to go one step further and have a bit more comfort, a little bit more performance, a little bit more room, than a super naked. You know, S1000Rs I think are great. Maybe not the most characterful, but just do everything. Superb. Aprilia Tuono is one of my favourites. Just like your RSV4, but more comfortable. Very few compromises. Even if you're on track, you can still win a fast group track day on one. KTM 1290 or 1390, probably one of the most comfortable bikes I've ever ridden across any genre. MT10, bonkers if you can get away with the looks of it. So yeah, I would go for a good sports naked or a super naked. My personal favourites would be, I think, if I was going to go for a sports naked, I'd probably have an MT09, although I'm not really that keen on the looks. And if I was going to go for a super naked, I'd probably go for an Aprilia. I think probably the KTM's dynamically better, but I think I'd rather open the door to an Aprilia in the morning than the KTM. But let me know how you get on. That's quite an old question, so you might have already gone down a specific route anyway, but let me know how you got on. Thank you very much. Next, from XL Master 4779. Hello mate. We did a one-on-one instructing day together at Donington, and thank you for the t-shirt. Brownie points for anyone who knows what this track is. Anyway, right. Hey Michael, Cadwell looks like a great track, so that's in response to, I think, my GSXR 750 video around there. My local track, this one, is also very narrow, and I was nearly on the grass on Sunday. Rider error. I noticed you mentioned a few crashes on that track. Are track days, ignoring racing, dangerous? How do you balance the risk of damaging your beautiful GSXR 750 with the enjoyment of track riding? Cheers. Well, yeah, interesting question. So I think track days are dangerous. You know, when you see the amount of red flags you get on track days, especially in the morning when people are crashing on cold tyres and getting a little bit too giddy, a little bit too quickly. The last track day I did was Spa a few weeks ago, and we were let out on track in one session. And by the time we'd got to the first proper right-hander, we came up Eau Rouge along the straight, the first right-hander into a chicane, somebody had lost the front. So, you know, that if you get caught up in someone's accident like that, it's going to be dodgy. I think the whole mixing, I think this was on 44 Teeth News the other day, mixing wildly different capacity and powerful bikes in the same group is a recipe for disaster. But I don't think anyone knows the answer to it, because equally having different abilities in a group can be a similar recipe for disaster, although I don't think as much, because I think if you've got a fast and a slow rider in the same group on similar bikes, you will kind of be doing a similar speeds. You'll both be going fast down the straights and you'll both be going slowish in the corners, but the faster rider will have a bit more of everything. Whereas at the moment you can have a slow bike and a fast bike. The slow bike is going to be slow down the straights, really fast through the corners, and get held up by the fast bike, and the fast bike blasts past, and they're like cat and mouse the whole session. And then that's where the frustrations happen. That's where the slow bike tries to lift the fast bike up through the corner because he's just getting held up everywhere. It's where the fast bike is just zapping down the straights, and then there's the closing speed. So yeah, track days are dangerous. Another one I did recently, I did a track evening on a bike, and the speed difference was quite big between the real quick ones and the not so quick ones. And you're just cringing a lot of the time, you know, waiting to be barreled down upon. So I'm not quite sure what the answer is with that. But I do take my GSXR 750 on track, and it's a road bike and it's got beautiful road bodywork. The last thing I'd want to do is crash it, but I'm still happy to take it on track. And when I went to Spa on it, there was the extra layer of the fact I'd ridden there, and I wouldn't have been able to get back if I'd have crashed it. So yeah, you can mitigate all of those risks by taking your bike in a van, having a track only bike, putting track day bodywork on your bike. So, you know, if you do slip off it or whatever, it's not going to be a problem. But also I kind of cut the cloth to suit. So I don't go out on my road bike and ride like I would do in a race. So I can still get a lot of enjoyment out of my road bike, but you know, being a little bit more careful in the dangerous bit. So I suppose the most dangerous phase of a corner is on the way in, when you're trail braking on the way in, and that initial kind of tap of the throttle when the bike's at full lean to when you kind of get it up to half lean. That's the kind of the danger zone, is kind of that approach to the mid corner and the exit from mid corner. Everywhere else is relatively safe. So I just try like mad in a straight line. I brake as hard as I want to in a straight line because it's perfectly safe, but then I don't lean on the front brake too much going in. I don't trail brake hard going in, where you're balancing grip with lean, and I'm not as keen just to absolutely smash it on the throttle coming out the corner. My 750 hasn't got traction control, not that it really needs it, hasn't really got the power. But if you've got electronics, both of those kind of riding zones are going to be safer as well. So yeah, if I want to go do a track day or an MCN test or a launch or whatever, where I know I definitely don't want to crash, I'm much steadier in that zone of the corner. Obviously, if you're chasing lap times or you want to chase your mate down, you're gonna be risking more. But that's how I kind of avoid any mishaps. And then anything else after that is probably out of your control. You know, if you get tangled up with another rider, you slip on something on the track or whatever, and that's something you just got to accept when you go on a track. It's a dangerous scenario to be in, so you've got to take as many precautions as you can to make it as safe as you can for yourself and everybody else. But thanks very much for your question and for the t-shirt. Thank you. Right, this is from Jeremy Adams 5692. Amazing episode with plenty of jigsaw and tyre talk. Thank you very much. That's regarding one of the last videos. My question is about GP shift. Is there an actual benefit to GP shift on the road, or are people just copying their favourite racer? And do you ever have issues going back and forth from GP shift in track bikes to normal road riding testing? Thanks. Oh, that's a good question. So GP shift, you basically mean race shift. So as we all know, road bikes, with the gearbox, you press down once, that's first gear, and then to select the rest of the gears, you go up through the gearbox. So neutral, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth. And that's fine on the road. You know, that changed, I guess, in the 70s. You know, old British bikes used to have kind of upside down shift, race shift, and they used to be on the right hand side. But now the kind of convention is gears are on the left and they're one down, the rest up. A lot of racers actually use road shift. I think people like Chris Walker do. I remember testing, or we were supposed to test Biaggi's championship winning Aprilia at Aragon. As it was, we ended up testing Laverty's with Biaggi's fairings on, because Biaggi didn't want anyone to ride his bike. And I was quite glad, because Biaggi has road shift. And when I'm on track, I'm used to riding on race shift, because that's what I use on my race bike. Race shift on track is very useful where you're leaning to the left and you want to do a quick upshift just by stamping on the gears. So for example, Devil's Elbow at Mallory, somewhere like that. The kind of run between the double lefts at Spa, is it double gauche? You've got to go from third to fourth while you're leaning left. It's easy to tap on the lever. It's also good to tap on the lever to go up on the race start, because you're pushing down as you're accelerating off rather than lifting up, which helps keep the wheelie down very, very slightly. In terms of having race shift on the road, there's absolutely no benefit unless you really like it. You know, if you like riding race shift on the track, why not make your road bike race shift so you're always riding the same kind of gear pattern? And I know those racers that use road shift do so because they're used to using road shift on their motocross bikes or whatever. But it is quite easy to go between the two. I mean, I remember reading somewhere that Mick Doohan said with race shift, when your head's down, like down on the tank, you'll press down. And when you lift up, your head's up, you lift up. So that's how you remember up or down. So I think it's muscle memory after a while. You know, when I go on a race bike on the racetrack, it's very natural to go race shift. But the bit I struggle with is riding a race bike on road shift on the track. That's when I really have to think about it. If it's a road bike, it's fine. If it's a race bike, so. But anyway, I don't think there's any advantage to race shift on the road unless you just want to always use that and you do a lot of track work as well. But it is an advantage on track as well. I'm also thinking coming in out of clearways, Brands Hatch, where you're kind of leant over to the right and you're throwing gears at the bike. It's easy to tap down on the gear lever rather than hook your foot under and change up like that. Doesn't make an enormous amount of difference either way. It's just like anything on a bike, it's how you feel the most comfortable. But great question, thank you very much. Next one. Could you take a minute to articulate, this is from Palika. Thanks for your question anyway. Articulate how flex is engineered into bike frames and how it helps. It sounds a bit counterintuitive and I can't get my head around the idea. Thanks. Well, I'm no engineer, I'm no Mufka, I'm no Peter Bond and Matt Oxley, but I've sat through enough technical presentations at launches to know that flex in bike frames in a certain direction is very good. So you need a frame that is very stiff in the kind of front and back direction. So when you're on the throttle hard, you need a frame that's very supportive and very stiff. When you're on the brakes hard, you need stiffness and support, which is why Ducatis with their kind of partial frames are just amazing on the brakes, because they've got so much stability, they've got so much stiffness. And that's why swing arms are braced as well. When you're hard on the throttle, you want to brace swing arms so everything stays nice and tight and nice and stable. And when the bike's upright doing all those things, the suspension works as it should. As soon as you start to lean the bike over, the suspension going up and down, it's not going up and down anymore, it's going from side to side, and it's not really doing its job that suspension is designed to do. And suspension is designed to let a wheel and a tyre track smoothly over bumps and keep the tyre in contact with the road. And that can't happen at full lean. And if you've got a very stiff bike, the suspension's not working for you, and there's no give in the bike to kind of soak up the bumps either. So what the engineers do is try and introduce some flex into the frame, so the frame becomes a big spring. So now the frame will start to absorb the bumps like a suspension unit, and crucially, that gives the bike more grip because it gives the tyres a chance to real sink into the grains of the tarmac, and it gives the rider a lot more feel. And the more feel you can give the rider, the more comfortable they are and the faster they're going to go. So I would say that in a nutshell is how it's all working. And you can see, for example, Ducati are a good example. So, you know, in the Panigale era, when they first came around, you know, the whole engine was the chassis, and they were very, very stable under acceleration on the brakes. But as soon as you introduced any lean, there was no flex in the bike, and it would become quite wayward and quite aggressive. And over the years, they made the bikes more flexible. So first of all, with the V4, they had a more of a frame than the twin, and now the V4s have got a much flexier frame and a double-sided swing arm with big holes in it to let everything flex. Remember the V4R had big slots in the headstock to let everything move around. But it's a black art, I guess, from the factories. You know, you've got to know exactly how to build flex into a frame in the correct direction and stability in another direction. By making the materials thinner, you know, they can do it with tubular frames. They can change the thickness of certain bits of the frame around the bike, or with a beam frame. I remember being on a WSB test where we tested some Crescent Suzukis at Jerez in about 2011, and I was asking Paul Denning what they were doing, and they were spending the whole day testing different frames. So even though World Superbikes have to run road bike frames, they're allowed to cut them in half and add material or take away material to give them more or less flex. So yeah, it's a massive thing, flex, but that is kind of the buzzword at the moment: longitudinal flex, lateral flex, and everything in between. So basically, the more the bike's leant over, the more it loses its natural suspension. So you've got to kind of introduce suspension into the frame, basically. And I think that is correct. But if anyone's got a better explanation, please feel free to tell us in the comments. Thanks very much. And now Mr. Hugh Jampton. Hi Nancy, I have a question about the voluntary 186 mile an hour limit agreement. Would I be correct in thinking that the Italian manufacturers don't really care for it much? Some years ago MV Agusta produced a bike labelled a 312, meaning it could manage 302 k's, 194 mile an hour. Has anyone tested a new Panigale for top speed yet? I'd be very surprised if a bike producing that much power only does 186 mile an hour. Well, Mr. Hugh Jampton, thank you very much for your question. Yeah, the Japanese had kind of a voluntary 186 mile an hour limit for years and years. It even went down for a while. They imposed a kind of a self-restricting 280k. So what era would this have been? I suppose late noughties, early tens. Bikes like the Blades and GSX-R1000s would only do about 175, and at the time the GSX-R 750 went faster than 1000 because they had this kind of self-imposed limit. When we speed tested bikes back in the day, true GPS speed, we never saw anything near 186 anyway. You know, all the K5s and the R1s of the noughties and early 10s wouldn't really climb above 180, depending on if it had a good wind direction or whatever. But then we know that they were restricted because when you turn them into race bikes, they go a lot faster. So yeah, there was some kind of restriction in there. MV at the time, I think that was one of the fastest bikes we ever tested. It wasn't even that 312, I think it was just a normal F4000. And I think we saw something like 192 out of it, which was probably one of the fastest production bikes we tested then, and probably it still kind of stands now. We don't really do a lot of sort of performance testing in that direction anymore. I think now these bikes are more measured in terms of lap time than kind of ultimate top speed. You know, another reason was kind of just more of a practical reason. We used to do all our testing at Bruntingthorpe, which had a 2 mile runway. And then that kind of closed down for speed testing. It's used for other things now. And it's hard to find a stretch of road or stretch of runway that's kind of easy to access for us. Closer, we do use another runway which isn't quite as quick, but to be honest, that kind of desire for performance testing for superbikes has kind of dwindled a little bit. But it would be interesting to see how fast the likes of the new Panigale and stuff would go. I would say that, yeah, they'd probably knock on the door at 200 mile an hour if they didn't have any top speed restrictors. But it's something that people don't really talk about now. It's all about lap times. It's all about how a bike makes its power. It's all about the electronics, how it controls its power, aero, and everything in between. And you know, that's another point with aero. You know, those big wings on the bikes just slow them down in a straight line anyway. So yeah, it's hard to know, but yeah, definitely the Japanese were playing ball back in the day, and then maybe a few other manufacturers weren't. But you know, it's all kind of pub bragging figures anyway, isn't it? How many people ever... I don't think I've ever gone knowingly more than 185, 190 anyway. I never really used to get involved with the speed testing. It was always Bruce Dunn. So yeah. But yeah, good question. If anyone knows how fast the new Panigale V4S goes, top speed in a straight line, GPS, not on the speedo, let me know. Next, from Paul Hope 3401. Hi Michael, I have a question about emergency braking on modern bikes. Besides the importance of progressive brake application, is it still better to use engine braking and shift down through the gears and rely on a slipper clutch to smooth out the downshifts on the drivetrain stroke tyre? Or you have dual channel ABS, clutch in and rely on your revs separate ABS channels to deal with that if you apply too much. My bike has a slipper clutch and a dual channel ABS, So I suspect clutch straight away may be best for me. But I've never compared both, and I was taught to use engine braking, so that's what I do. But could using engine braking be a no longer required technique for emergency stops, an outdated remnant from the pre-ABS or even dual channel ABS days? Good question. So when you're talking about emergency braking, I assume you're talking about braking in an emergency rather than just trying to stop as fast as you can for a corner or whatever. And if that's the case, you don't worry about the clutch at all. If a car's pulled out in front of you, you just pull the brakes for all you're worth and don't worry about the clutch, because who cares if you stall at the end of it? If you're pulling the clutch in, you're not giving yourself any engine braking at all. Even if you were in sixth gear at that point, you're going to get some engine braking if you leave the clutch out. So pulling the clutch in is just going to take away one of your brakes, basically one of your three brakes: front brake, back brake, engine brake. So yeah, in an emergency situation, whether you've got ABS or not, or a slipper clutch, you just pull the brakes as hard as you can to try and flipping stop. And if you stall at the end of it or lose your balance at the end of it, it doesn't really matter, because that action might have saved your life. And then if you're just braking hard for a corner, then it is a combination of hard braking and engine braking, matching revs through the gears, either with a blipper or rev matching with blipping it yourself. But the simple answer there is just brake for your life, because you might only have a couple of seconds to stop, and you just want to pull on those levers as hard as you can. And I think instinct would probably make you do that anyway. But yeah, I wouldn't. Maybe somebody out there may disagree, but yeah, don't touch the clutch, pull the brakes. But let me know what you think. Thank you very much. Two more. Or maybe more. Three more. This one's from Pat William, 543. What's the most brutal, hardest to ride road legal bike you've ever experienced? Not in a this thing had fork or when the Queen Mother was alive way, but make you feel like Capirossi, like you're not good enough to ride it kind of way. Hope that makes sense. I think so. I mean, what I'd say is the best bikes I've ever ridden are the ones that are the easiest to ride. Hard bikes are hard for everybody, whether it's a pro rider or not. And that goes for, when we've got to ride factory world superbikes and MotoGP bikes or whatever. They have had the most forgiving throttles, the most plush suspension, the smoothest gearboxes. So I would say that the secret to a fast bike is one that's easy. And if you kind of extrapolate that to the road or track riders of our level, not GP level, generally people can ride softer road bikes faster than they can do a very, very stiff race bike. And you've only got to look at something like a Moto2 bike, and we've had a chance to ride a few of those. They are so stiff, you cannot feel what they're doing. You're trusting what they can do, and they've got more grip than you know what to do with, and more performance and more lean angle than you know what to do with. Well, now the last good one I would have ridden, it was quite a while ago, it had been Tito Rabat's championship winning Mark VDS bike. We rode it at Almeria, and I was just going around on rails, but I wouldn't have known if I was 1 second away from crashing or 1 hour away from crashing. Do you know what I mean? It just didn't talk to me. I just trusted it, and it was amazing. But I would have had a lot more fun, a lot more feel, a lot more confidence on, say, a Track Prep CBR 600. So yeah, you don't need a gnarly bike to be fast. So really, to answer your question, the gnarly bikes have been the ones which have been hard and difficult to ride and ultimately slow. So I touched on it earlier, the first generation of the Panigales, the 1199 and the 1299s, they were all action. Although I enjoyed riding them, and they kind of respond really well to the point and squirt riding style that you would do on a superbike. Hard brakes in, using all the stability from the chassis, flick it on its side for a minimal amount of time, then lift it up and accelerate. So you're using the stiffness of the chassis to your advantage. As soon as you start to run big corner speed, the things were just an absolute handful. So they were pretty gnarly. They were exciting to ride. And then a lot of MV Augustas, very stiff, very short, very aggressive. Not all of them. I would say the kind of the ride by wire era, I'd say at the beginning, MV lost their way with them a little bit. But yeah, and you know, a lot of those, they had 50mm diameter forks, which are like scaffold poles. You couldn't feel what they were doing at all. So very aggressive. They made you feel like you're always on lap record pace. So if you just want a bike that's going to make you excited, then absolutely. But yeah, they kind of stick out really, some of those Italian bikes, as being gnarly. Generally, Japanese bikes, German bikes are quite soft, quite easy to ride. You know, sometimes I used to think of those old MV test riders literally had 2 speeds, flat out or nothing. And they would work for those riders, but as soon as you started riding them a little bit more normally, they weren't that nice to ride. So yeah, I think that's what you mean, and I hope I've answered your question. Next, it's from Scuddy100HYA. Hi Neezy, great content as always, thank you very much. Is your Arai third shelf down on the right, black and silver, in your custom paint scheme? Would love a better look. If so, who does your paintwork? Well, yes, it is. So this is in my, oh look, it's the BSB pose. Yeah, so this was done in my paint scheme in 2005 maybe, when I raced at Goodwood. At the time at the Goodwood Revival, there was a rule that you couldn't have leery lids and leathers. People kind of do now. So I got Rich Art Concepts, who spray on my lids. He's an absolute magician. I mean, this looks like a factory finished lid, the way it all, you know, it fits back together as well. He's based near Birmingham, and he still does my crash helmets now. So he did this for me for Goodwood, and Arai ended up making a replica of it. So in 2005, they made a replica of my normal, colourful, cartoony crash helmet, and they made 1,500 in all. Arai UK have to order batches of 500 from the factory. So there was a lot of those rolling around. And then that's when Phoenix Distribution used to import Arai's. And then they decided to make a replica of these. They placed their first order of 500 with the factory and made these. So you can still see a few of these out and about, although you wouldn't want to put one on your head now because they're over 20 years old. But then that kind of arrangement stopped when Phoenix stopped doing Arai's and Moto Direct started doing Arai's, and that kind of relationship stopped, which is a bit of a shame. But yeah, I really, really like it. I'd still like to wear it now, and it still looks good because I haven't really worn it that much. But I guess I shouldn't trust such an old crash helmet. But yeah, absolutely love that one. But thank you very much for your question. And finally, right, here we are. So this one's from VKN Air 6652. Hi Michael, what do motorcycle road testers do when they retire? I know you never retire if you're passionate about what you do, but still. And specifically, what do you plan to do when you eventually hang up the boots? Write a memoir, a book on great motorcycles. Thanks for the great content. Cheers. No problem at all. Well, a lot of road testers never retire. They still carry on. You know, the ones that don't kind of work for actual publications anymore, they've got their own YouTube channels, they work freelance. But then some that actually have left the road testing game completely go into PR, which is kind of similar to road testing but a lot better paid. And I can think of maybe a couple. Trevor Franklin used to be PB and MCN, went into PR, but now he's eventually he's turned up at BSD in Peterborough, works there. Alex Hearn used to be PB, TWO. He does a bit of PR now. There are very few that kind of disappear altogether. You know, some of them do get a bit of burnout because, you know, it can be quite a relentless job, even though a very enjoyable one. But in terms of myself, I'm going to just keep going as long as I can. I'm going to keep being a road tester as long as I can. And I think rather than do kind of memoirs or talk about, you know, have books with the greatest bikes, I think this is probably the kind of vehicle to talk about those things now, rather than sort of books and what have you. So yeah, I'm going to keep on riding, keep on doing these, keep on enjoying bikes. But that is it for this week's video. Thanks very much for watching. Stay tuned for more Q&As, more little tests of interesting bikes, and I will catch you soon.